today, our topic for the Talk and Tour series is going to cover, some methods by way that we can manipulate soil in order to improve, infiltration of water. I can't stress to, the concept of keeping rain right where it falls. And so, soil plays a huge part of that. And so here today with us to guide us through this topic is Dr. Becky Bowling. Dr. Bowling is an assistant professor and extension specialist for urban water with Texas A&M AgriLife. She, in this position, she works jointly with the Texas Water Resource Institute, AgriLife's Water University, and the Department of Crop and Soil Sciences, where they conduct research on water conservation and resource use efficiency in the urban landscape. So before I turn it over to Becky, just a few housekeeping details. If you find that you have a question that you want to ask, rather than holding on to that question till the end, go ahead and at the bottom of your screen, you can click chat and type in your question, and we will then at the end of the presentation, we'll review those questions with Dr. Bowling. Also at that time when we're in the Q&A, we can go ahead and unmute ourselves so that we can actually have a free flow conversation that way. One last detail, if you so desire, when we're done with this presentation and the questions and answers, I'm going to stay on and I will be conducting a virtual tour of the EduScape that we had described just a few minutes ago. So if you want to partake in that, just stay online and we'll do that. So that's all I have, and we're going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Becky Bowling.
Great, thank you. I'm going to just share my little screen real quick. Can you guys hear me okay? Give me a thumbs up. Okay. So, alrighty. Well, I really appreciate you guys being here with me today. I'm excited to talk about this topic, and I'm excited to work with the Riverside Nature Center. This is a part of the state that I just absolutely love visiting, and I was sorry that I couldn't be there in person, but hopefully I'll have another opportunity sometime in the future to come out and be there. So we're gonna kind of approach this in three major parts today. We're gonna talk about the value of infiltration and why we're talking about that today. We're gonna talk a little bit about Texas soils, and I'm gonna share a little background on our magnificent soils here in the state of Texas. And then we're gonna go through some practical recommendations for really optimizing infiltration in your landscape. So the first thing, this term infiltration, if we define it, it's typically defined as the soil's ability to allow water movement into and through the soil profile. So if we think about, the depth of our soils and the way that rainfall or irrigation water hit that soil, we want there to be a good amount of movement as deep into the soil profile as we can get. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we face with depth, particularly in Central Texas. This allows the soil to temporarily store water, and it makes this water available for uptake by plants and soil organisms. So infiltration is part of what we call the water cycle. There's a lot of different aspects of the water cycle. Infiltration not only contributes to the uptake of water by our plants and supports healthy vegetation in the landscape, but it also allows for recharge of our groundwater. And so that's a very important aspect as well. And again, it's just kind of one small part. There's a lot of different aspects of the water cycle, including evaporation, transpiration from our plant material, precipitation, irrigation, runoff, which we touched on a little bit before the talk started, and we'll talk about it more as we move in. Now, when infiltration is poor, let's say that we're dealing with a particularly heavy soil, and we'll talk about some of the barriers that may limit infiltration. A few different things may happen. So one of these is that we may see water may pond, particularly on level areas. It can just kind of sit there on the soil surface, not moving into the profile. This can create challenges where our plants get sort of drowned and we just have kind of a big muddy mess. And the other thing that we may experience, particularly when we're dealing with a slope, is we see an increase in runoff of that water. And along with it, it may take soil, important soil particles, and the things that we find in the soil, which can include things like nutrients. We don't want to lose those nutrients, of course. They may end up in water and potentially cause nutrient pollution in our water bodies. And additional things that we may lose from the landscape as well include bacteria. So if we have pets, or even if we don't have pets, if we have visitors to our landscape that use the restroom and things like that, we can see considerable amount of bacteria from that moving off of our property. And additionally, if we choose to use any landscape pesticides, we may have unintended movement of those pesticides where we don't want them to go as well. So as much as possible, when we do get rainfall or when we irrigate a landscape area, we want that water to move into the soil and be retained by that soil and to keep everything in place. So a couple little interesting facts here. I'm an urban water specialist, and a couple little statistics for you. The first is that on average, about 30 to 50% of household water is used on the landscape. And this number can fluctuate a little bit throughout the year, depending on where we are in the country. So certainly here in Texas, we may err on the higher end of that spectrum because we tend to be a much hotter state, and a lot of times we may have a tendency to overwater in an attempt to preserve our landscape during the hottest months of the year. Of this 50% that we're putting out onto the landscape, as much as 50% of that on average is going to be lost due to runoff. And so this is just water that we're ultimately wasting. And so this is something, again, that we really want to avoid. And that's why we're going to be talking about infiltration today. How can I really encourage water to move into my soil and be retained by my landscape? So there's several different things that may affect infiltration or the rate at which water moves into our soil. One of the first ones that we probably have the least control over is going to be soil texture. Soil texture refers to the ratio of sand to silt to clay in our soil profile. And here in the state of Texas, we have a lot of diversity in our soils, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. So some soils may be very, very deep and sandy. Some soils may be very heavy clay. Some may be more of a silty clay loam, which is what we see a lot, in parts of central Texas, and they may be more shallow. And depending on the mixture that we're dealing with, heavier soils that contain more clay typically are going to have a reduced infiltration rate, right? Many of us know this. This is intuitive, that when we have a really heavy clay soil, it holds on to water better than sand, but water also will move through it much more slowly. Sandy soils are going to offer us the greatest infiltration rate, but the downside to a sandy soil is sometimes water moves through it too quickly. So then we're constantly having to replenish that water in order to make sure that our plants have what they need. And along with that too, we see some big differences in terms of nutrient retention. So in a very heavy soil, we may see that it holds on to some of our nutrients really well, whereas in a sandy soil, we may see that nutrients like nitrogen or potassium in particular get leached through that soil profile very quickly. And so again, that's something that we're having to keep up with in the way that we manage our landscape. Another thing that affects infiltration is going to be something called soil structure. So this is the way in which our soil particles kind of aggregate or clump together. And what we may see is there's good soil structure that really allows for optimum permeability, but is not so loose and so fine that we create kind of like a concrete mixture. If we get a little too chunky and we have these very large aggregates, that can create some issues where we don't have good pore space for our roots to grow into. We have some issues with nutrient availability, and again, water may move through too quickly. And so again, some of this may or may not be within our control. There are a few things that we can do that can have an impact on soil structure, which we'll talk about, but there's only so much we can do to really impact nature. Other things that can affect infiltration are going to be our climate and our precipitation patterns, as well as the quality of our water. And, you know, in many parts of Texas now, we're seeing an increase in the use of reclaimed water resources, which is a really valuable tool in conserving water, right? We're recycling water. But with this, along with some of just the natural water resources that we have here in the state, we do sometimes have concerns about really high salinity levels. Things like high sodium or high bicarbonates can actually have a really significant impact on the structure and stability of our soil. So I really like this picture. This is a little soil aggregate, just like you saw when we were talking about structure. And this is what it looks like when it's exposed to increasing levels of high sodium water. So the more sodium we have, the more dispersion we get. And what this can ultimately lead to is something kind of like a concrete block, where we just don't have good structure to that soil because the salts in the water have compromised it. And this keeps water from moving in and can significantly affect plant health. So this is something that is certainly a challenge here in Texas. And then the plant material that we have in our landscape as well can have a really significant impact on infiltration. We'll talk about that in more detail here in a little bit. So I wanted to do just a little bit of background on Texas soils. You know, Texas is kind of unique in terms of the soils that we deal with here in our state. So we're a very, very large state with a lot of diversity, right? We have a very broad precipitation gradient where we may have 55, 60 inches of rain a year on the eastern part of the state, and then we kind of gradually decrease until we get all the way to El Paso, and we have about 7 to 10 inches of rain a year on average. And so that, in addition to differences in our hardiness zones and our temperature ranges, creates a big variety of different ecoregions that significantly affect the way our soils are structured, the performance of those soils, and the plant material that's appropriate for us to use. And actually here in the state of Texas, we have 9 soil orders. So to kind of put that into context for you, a soil order is the way that we broadly classify different types of soils. And in the entire world, there are 12 soil orders. And here in Texas, we have 9 of them. Okay, so we have quite a range of different soil types here in the state. And again, that can significantly affect things like infiltration, water catchment, nutrient availability, and the support of healthy plant life. Another thing that we see quite a bit here in Texas is we have something called shrink swell clays in many parts of the state. So there are 2 primary kind of types of clays. We've got more stable one-to-one clays that we may see in more weathered regions. So if I go out to the east, I did my PhD in Georgia, and in Georgia we had more stable one-to-one clays. They did not do the shrinking and expanding that we see with our clays here in Texas. Now our clays are what we call 2-to-1 clays. As they dry, they physically shrink up and create cracks in the soil. Many of us are familiar with this if we've lived in the state for a long time. And it can create some unique challenges, both with our landscape as well as with our foundation. So that's something that we deal with in areas where we've got heavier clay soils. I also wanted to share this with you guys. So There is something called the Web Soil Survey. This is something that's been put together by the USDA's Natural Resource Conservation Service, where they've actually gone out and they've mapped different soils and soil profiles all throughout the country. And you can actually pull it up by county if you want to. So this is Kerr County, and get a sense of the types of soils that you see in that particular area that you're interested in. And so I wanted to share an example of one of the soil types that we see in Kerr County. And this particular soil complex accounts for almost 15% of the county based on the Web Soil Survey, which is the largest percentage of one soil type within the county. So there's many, many different types of soil. But I think what you'll see here is this is somewhat typical of many of the different types of soils that we have there, where we have about 0 to 7, or for some others we may see 0 to 4 or 0 to 12 inches of a cobbly clay or a silty clay loam or something like that. And then just beyond that, we hit bedrock. So that's one of the challenges that we face when we're in Central Texas, is sometimes our soils tend to be a bit more shallow. And this can lend itself to some struggles depending on what our landscape goals are. You know, a lot of times that I worked as a state turf grass extension specialist for about 2 years before I switched over to focusing more on water. And a lot of times, you know, we tell people to really encourage irrigation water to go at least 6 inches into the soil and try to prepare a root zone of about 8 to 12 inches. And if I go and I talk about that in certain parts of Central Texas, people just laugh at me. So, you know, we'll talk about that some today. It is kind of an interesting challenge. This is a little bit more about this particular soil complex here. It says depth to restrictive feature, typically 4 to 20 inches until you hit bedrock. And so this is kind of a fun thing to poke around on. If you're a little bit of a soils nerd or a soils enthusiast like me, you may enjoy spending a little time looking at that more closely. So what I wanted to do is, you know, kind of knowing all of this background, go into offering a few practical recommendations that are designed to help improve infiltration. And they kind of cover a bunch of different aspects of management. So we will talk a little bit about soil amendments, but we'll talk about some other things as well that are very important for optimizing infiltration. The first of these is maintaining healthy plant material and having good vegetative coverage on top of your soil. So this is very important for protecting the soil from soil erosion while simultaneously encouraging infiltration and water catchment. You can think of the roots that a plant produces as being little channels for water to move into the soil. So the deeper, denser, and healthier our root system is, the better infiltration we will typically see in the landscape. And so a lot of our management practices, we should really, really try to cater them toward developing a healthier, deeper root system. A lot of times we may get a little bit hung up on what we're seeing above ground. You know, how do I encourage greener leaves or more flowers or more fruit? And we kind of forget about that really important soils and rooting piece. So I would really encourage you, if infiltration is a priority in your landscape, taking steps to really focus on your root system. Maintaining healthy vegetation offers several other benefits as well. So when we have more vegetative coverage, we get a cooling effect from that vegetation. And we also see an increased support of biodiversity. We may attract more pollinators into our landscape or other wildlife. I also wanted to introduce you to something called the phytobiome. This is kind of a new term that we're seeing in the big world of plant science these days. And it broadly refers to the fact that anytime we have a plant in place in the soil, everything that happens just around that plant is going to be changed by the fact that that plant is there. So the air around the plant, the air around the leaf surface, and everything that's happening around the root system in the soil near that plant is going to change as a function of that plant being there. And we know that plants, their roots will produce little exudates that change, completely transform the microbial ecology of the soil. So we see a significant impact on the life of the soil, the organic matter that's produced, and all of that can then also significantly impact infiltration and the overall health of our soil. So it's a really, really neat thing to think about. Every time you plant your plant, you're completely changing the environment around the plant and the soil that you're planting it into. And so it's a really powerful thing to kind of keep in mind as you're looking at, planting your garden areas, your landscape areas, and choosing different things. And of course, when we diversify our plant material, we also diversify the impact that we have on the soil and the air in that area. So one of the first things that I really want to encourage when you are thinking about vegetative coverage is to focus on native and adapted plants. And I think that you guys have a lot of opportunities there to learn more and see what that looks like with the EduScape and with other things that I know the Hill Country Master Gardeners are working on. And so really taking advantage of some of our excellent Texas natives that are adapted to tolerate our unique Texas soil, as well as our unique climate conditions, including our tendency towards having long-term drought events, some of our very hot temperatures. Many of our native plants are just going to be much more well suited to tolerate those conditions, and it just makes our job as a gardener much easier on the front end when we find something that wants to grow where we're planting it. And there's a lot of great options out there. Many of our native and adapted plants do an excellent job of bringing pollinators into the landscape and being extremely attractive, in addition to being functional. So I wanted to share just a few resources. I know you guys, some of you may be master gardeners watching, et cetera, and you may already know about some of these, but if you are thinking about how to bring new plants into your landscape, there's a few resources that I really like. One of the first ones is going to be the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. So this actually offers a number of really great plant lists, and for the state of Texas, they will actually have plant lists by Texas ecoregion. So you can choose where you are in the state and you can get a plant list that's kind of catered to that specific regional area. They also have some really great plant lists for certain functions. So if you are interested in having more of a pollinator garden, they have some great lists for that. So it's really, really great resource. If you've never been on there before, I suggest that you check it out. We have a lot of good resources through Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, and I would just say that our county agent in Bexar County, which is San Antonio, he does a really, really great job of putting together resources for Central Texas, and so I would consider poking around in some of those if you've never been on there before. And then again, the Hill Country Master Gardeners Group, they've got a number of good resources as well on their website, and they talk a little bit about their demonstration gardens. And so a lot of opportunities there to be exposed to different types of plant material and to kind of think about how you can be creative with that. Now, I did want to talk a little bit about turf grass areas. Whether you love turf or hate turf, a lot of times, even if we don't choose to have it in a large area of our landscape, many of us still choose to have or inherit a small turf area in our landscape. And turf grass is not all bad. It gets a bad rep, but there's a lot of ecosystem services that it actually can offer the landscape. So the first is that it offers dense, uniform coverage of vegetation. So this is especially helpful in protecting the soil from soil erosion. It can be a great resource for phytoremediation. So you can think of it as a big filter where it can actually help to clean the water that passes through it. That dense coverage supports optimal infiltration. Turf grass systems are known to help with nutrient retention. They can actually capture and sequester harmful greenhouse gases when they're well maintained, and they're a great space for recreation. Now, I did want to kind of talk about some of our more drought tolerant turf grasses that are out there. There's a lot of turf grass breeding efforts at different universities. And there's a big emphasis right now to create turf grasses that are more drought tolerant and are well suited for areas where we have limited irrigation, or we don't want to irrigate very often. The primary way in which these grasses survive in the absence of water is through something called drought avoidance. And so what that means is these grasses typically get their drought tolerance from their ability to root very deeply into the soil. So their superpower comes from their ability to form very deep roots. Well, if I'm in an area where my ability to grow deep roots is limited by the fact that I have rock 4 inches into my soil, that's going to impact the performance of some of these grasses. And it's always really important to me that I point that out to people that are kind of shopping around for these, that they may perform very differently depending on what's happening in your soil. So one thing that I would recommend if you do have turf grass areas is certainly you can look at some of our native grass options. You guys are in a great part of the state for growing these. Not everybody in the state of Texas is fortunate enough to live in a region where they can have healthy native turf grass. As we go further east and we get more than about 35 inches of rain a year, these grasses simply do not perform as well. They tend to get out-competed by things like Bermuda grass or weeds. They start to have issues with disease. And so really their sweet spot is right in those parts of Texas where we get between about 20 and 35 inches of rain a year. And we have several different options that are out there. Probably the one that people are most familiar with is going to be buffalo grass. And we do have seeded options as well as there are sodded options of buffalo grass available here in Texas. And there are a number of different farms actually throughout central Texas. There's several that are just south of San Antonio in Poteet and Jourdanton. So buffalo grass is going to be probably the most available option. We will also see it commonly combined with, in seed form, some other grasses like blue grama or curly mesquite. And if you're interested in kind of a seeded blend, you might look at Native American seed. They have a product called Thunder Turf. And then also the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center helped to develop something called Habiturf that combines these 3 different grasses. So that would be my recommendation. Now, if you are an enthusiast of more traditional turf, let's say you're interested in some of these more drought tolerant improved turf varieties, and even if you're not, one thing that we may have to consider depending on how much soil we really have to work with is we may have to deepen our root zone a little bit by bringing in soil from outside. And the city of Austin actually has a municipal ordinance that requires that when home builders are building new properties, they actually have to bring in about 6 inches of topsoil onto that new property in order to encourage a more lasting and sustainable landscape capable of supporting deeper roots. And so this is something that some people bring in and implement in order to allow deeper roots in their landscape. Again, ideally, if we can try to develop a root zone that's at least 8 to 10 inches deep, 12 inches deep, that would be ideal. Bermuda grass is actually able to root about 13, 14 feet into the soil if it has the room to do it. So that's one thing that we could explore in some cases, particularly if we're renovating or we're building a new landscape. If we do bring in soil, we want to make sure that we use something that is as coarse or coarser than our subsoil. So what I mean by that is this. If my soil that I'm working with already is pretty sandy, and I come in and I bring something that's more silty and has some clay in it, this can actually create some problems for me. It can create a barrier where water just kind of gets stuck in that upper layer and it doesn't move into the subsoil. So we want to try to have something that's a little bit coarser than what we already have. This is going to encourage optimal water movement and rooting into the subsoil by our plant material. We also have the option of amending our soil. This is something that we can do on the front end prior to planting an area, and we can also do it for established landscape areas through top dressing and things like that. Now, if we're thinking about soil amendments, probably the best one to look at is going to be compost material. High quality compost material has a number of known benefits. It improves soil structure, and this is true for both clay soils as well as sandy soils. So with our sandy soils, we see that it improves water holding capacity and nutrient retention in those soils. It keeps things from leaching through the soil profile quite as readily. With our heavy clay soils, we will see that compost can help with aggregation and improve the structure of that soil, which also helps to improve infiltration and aeration of that soil. So a lot of benefits there just from a physical standpoint. We also see that compost can offer us some pH stabilization. It helps to improve the diversity of our microbial life in the soil. So a lot of great benefits. We do want to make sure that we use something that's high quality. Some compost materials may be extremely salty. They may not offer some of the nutrient benefits that we're looking for. So we want to do a little bit of research, and if you have the time and the ability, I would recommend making your own. AgriLife offers a number of different opportunities to learn how to compost properly. I'm sure that there are a number of other great resources there that offer this as well. So that's one of the first things that we can consider. And again, this is something that we can incorporate into the soil prior to planting to really get great benefits. And you can also top dress with light layers of compost material onto established areas from year to year to introduce that material. Another amendment that we see, there's been some research done on this, particularly up in North Texas, is expanded shale. And this is clay or shale that is heated to very, very high heats until it expands and becomes this kind of light, porous ceramic material. And when this is incorporated into some of our very heavy shrink swell clays, we see that it can significantly improve infiltration rates in the soil, particularly if it's incorporated prior to planting a new area. We see some benefits there. So that's one thing that you can look at as well. Gypsum is another soil amendment that we would use primarily in high sodium situations. So when we do have questionable water quality and we're seeing it affect the integrity of our soil, that's when we would consider using something like gypsum. The way that it works is it essentially binds with the sodium in the soil and helps to kind of flush it from the soil so that the sodium is not affecting the structure of our soil so significantly. So we will see an improvement in the structure when we incorporate or add gypsum. From an irrigation standpoint, there's a few different things that we can do to really encourage infiltration. The first is to make sure that we are watering deeply and infrequently when we irrigate, particularly for established plants. So of course, when we have relatively young plants that are just getting going, we may have to water those a little bit more often. But once our plants are established, deep and infrequent irrigation is going to promote deeper, more vigorous root growth. And the reason for that is that, when we water very deeply, let's say that I water the upper 6 or 8 inches of my soil, and I allow enough time between watering that the upper part of my soil starts to dry down, it motivates my roots to reach for that water that's still there deeper in the soil profile. And so again, this is just one of those practices that we have in place to encourage that deeper root growth of our plant material. If you're talking about a turf grass area, this may mean watering about 1 time per week. If you're talking about areas that have native and adapted plant material, it may be once every 10 to 14 days. So really not watering nearly as often as we think. And then when we do water, trying to water as deeply as possible. One way that we can encourage deeper watering is to cycle and soak. And those of you that watched the irrigation program, you guys may have already seen some of this, but the idea behind cycle and soak is that we're pulsing water into our landscape more gradually. Okay, so let's say that I have a particularly heavy or compacted or very heavily sloped landscape, and I know that I've done my little catch can audit. I know that I need to run my irrigation system for about 30 minutes to put out 0.5 inches, half an inch. And let's say that I run it for that 30 minutes and I just watch half of it run right off into the street. So that's something that I really want to avoid. And so instead what I could do is program my irrigation system to run 3 times for 10 minutes. You know, I run it the first time, it kind of gets the soil, wicks the soil starts to wick that moisture. I kind of break through that initial barrier. I give it about 30, 45 minutes, maybe an hour for that water to move in. I come back, I hit it again, and then I do the same thing a third time. And this just allows that water to infiltrate and move in more gradually at a rate that it can really absorb and take up that water instead of me trying to hit it with everything at one time. And, we've got modern irrigation systems may already have a mechanism in place that allows you to program this, or as an alternative, you may be able, for an older system, to get on the manufacturer's website, and a lot of times they'll have instructions for how to do this with some of their older pieces of equipment. I also want to encourage you to use rainwater whenever possible. There's a couple different reasons for this. You know, the first is that a lot of times rainwater is higher quality than some of the irrigation water we have at our disposal. And so that means that we ultimately are going to help protect the integrity of our soil using this higher quality water resource. And in addition to that, rainwater harvesting is a great way to conserve water. We can capture rainfall when it comes and use it when we need it, and always kind of have that backup reserve instead of having to use our potable water sources to irrigate our landscape. If you don't have a rainwater catchment system in place, that may be something that you look into. It can be really fun to build a rain barrel too and get it installed. So we'll talk a little bit now about cultivation, and you'll see there that I say cultivation in moderation. So there is certainly such a thing as too much cultivation. So we're going to talk about that a little bit, but in some cases, cultivation may be really important where we know we have an especially compacted soil. So, we're talking about, when we talk about compaction, what does that mean? In a normal soil, we may have about 50% soil solids. Okay, those are my sand, silt, and clay particles. Then I may have about 25% air, 25% water in that soil profile, and making up my 100% of my healthy soil. Well, in a compacted soil, I may see that those ratios change significantly, where maybe I now have 70% solids, and then I have 25% water and 5% air. I've significantly reduced my pore space. This is going to affect the ability for my plant to have healthy roots. Plant roots need air. They respire the same way that we do. And so we want to try to prevent this from happening. Most common causes for compaction in the landscape are going to be construction practices. If you think about how a lot of our home lawns or our home landscapes are constructed in the first place, a lot of times there's a lot of heavy equipment involved. A lot of the good soil is kind of removed when we're developing those properties. We may also see compaction form as a function of using heavy equipment like riding mowers on the landscape, especially when the landscape is wet and the soil is wet. We may also see compaction occur from a lot of foot traffic. We've got big dogs that are out there playing all the time. So a lot of different things can lend themselves to compaction. And when compaction occurs, it's something that sometimes we have to address through physical cultivation to alleviate it and kind of break up that soil. Because it will significantly affect the health of our plants. We will see it affect the health of our grassy areas as well as our ornamental perennials. Even our trees can be significantly affected by soil compaction. And so again, one way to kind of have a more resilient soil is to maintain really healthy vegetation and to take all those steps to encourage deep roots. That will help kind of prevent compaction from becoming significant. But in some cases, we may have to explore some kind of cultivation practice. If we're looking at installing a new garden area, that may be where we bring in some kind of tiller and we physically work the soil. When we've got that soil exposed, that's a great time to think about incorporating in some high quality compost material. I may aim to incorporate 2 to 3 inches of compost into 6 inches of soil and really really help create a more robust, healthier soil prior to planting. If I'm dealing with an established area, like a turf grass area, I may have to be a little bit more creative. I can't go in there with that tiller without significantly damaging that turf grass. So instead, I may look at something like an aerator. And a lot of times, if you are dealing with a clay soil in particular, we would probably recommend a core or hollow tine aeration where you physically pull up these little plugs. Just creates more physical space, and it has a more significant impact on compaction in general. If you do implement this practice, you know, just remember that it is mechanically destructive to your turf, and so you want to do it during a time of year that your turf grass is in a position to recover. We usually recommend late spring, early summer, when our turf grass is actively growing and we've got some natural precipitation to help it. Now, again, we don't want to overdo it with cultivation. You know, over time in established soils, as part of that phytobiome that we talked about, we get this accumulation of organic material. We get a lot of microbial life that forms, and when we do a lot of physical cultivation, we disturb a lot of that. And we can also disturb seed banks of weeds that are in there. We can also expose some of that soil to soil erosion by wind. And so this is something that we should focus on doing on an as-needed basis when we know that that compaction is significant, and we're really going into it with a mindset of, I need to alleviate this compaction, and then I need to promote healthy vegetative growth to help this area recover. So one of the last tips that I'll offer you today is, you know, I kind of hinted at this already when we talked about compaction, but keeping things light. You know, if your soil is wet, if we've just had a lot of rainfall, maybe don't go right out with your riding mower, because you are going to compact those areas and create issues. You know, trying to rotate how intensively an area is being used to reduce the potential for compaction. All of this can be really important toward maintaining a soil that's got good structure, a lot of good pore space, and is really going to allow for water movement and the capture of water. So we'll just kind of finish up with just a few things kind of in review, and then we'll have some time for some questions if you guys got them. So again, we want to make sure that we are promoting dense, healthy vegetative coverage to protect our soil and to encourage infiltration and water catchment. If we need to, we can focus on deepening our root system by, or our root zone, by bringing in soil and kind of building that up, especially if we feel that our root zone is particularly limited from a depth standpoint. We can utilize soil amendments when appropriate, bringing in high quality compost material, or using things like gypsum or expanded shale when it's appropriate. We can focus on watering our landscape deeply and infrequently to promote healthy root growth. Cycle and sow to encourage infiltration and reduce runoff. Use rainwater whenever possible to conserve water and encourage the use of higher quality water that keeps our soil and our plants healthy. Cultivate in moderation to alleviate compaction when compaction is evident. And, you know, things that you can look for are going to be, you're going to see that your plant material looks stunted. You'll see maybe water pooling and not infiltrating into the soil. You may also just know that it's compacted because you've tried to take a shovel to it sometime recently and the shovel bent, or you bent in a way that you didn't plan on it, and you just know that there's something very firm there that needs to be addressed. Avoid the use of heavy equipment or excessive traffic in areas to really protect the integrity of your soil. So that's what I've got, and I try to leave some good time for questions. And so, you know, anything you guys have got, whether it's soil and water related or turf related or weeds related, all of those are topics I'm very comfortable speaking on. So let me know.
Well, I mean, lots and lots of fantastic information, Dr. Bowling. I mean, that you know, touched base on so many different, you know, elements. Folks, Come on, I know you've got questions, and this is the perfect time for you to, be able to find out more about these. No, you can unmute yourself and ask away.
Becky, this is Trudy Florence. Can you hear me?
Yes,
We can, Trudy, go ahead.
Okay. I moved here in December. I've been here for about 9 months, and I have nothing growing in my yard except I do have straggling daisy, which is great because it makes a really good ground cover.
Mhm.
I sprouted a mulberry tree and I just planted it in the backyard, but I had to do a lot of prepping for that hole.
Mhm.
I made the hole about 5 times bigger than about 2 feet across all the way around. I got the crowbar to knock out the gypsum that was in there. I took vinegar in the gypsum to get it boil up and get it softer, and then I hit the bedrock. And so my question is, I have a runoff problem because I've got a pretty good slope going all the way from the street down to the back fence. Would it be advisable to get landscaping bricks and create kind of like circular or half circles where the erosion is bad and fill it up with the soil that I have is fairly rocky, but it's sound. It's good soil. It grows things. So would that be an alternative to having beds, flower beds or stuff like that, having like little keystone things to do?
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
you can certainly try that, and you may get some benefit from doing that. In my experience, there's nothing like a good vegetative barrier to help slow down erosion and water movement. And so even if you don't have fully established beds, you could look at, in some of those critical areas, at the foot of a slope, you could look at bringing in some native ornamental grasses. They tend to be a little bit larger, more robust, and they're great for capturing and filtering water as it's hitting the landscape. And so a few that come to mind right now are going to be Indian grass is a nice option. Some of the muley grasses are a nice option. So that's something that I might look into.
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good question, Trudy.
Yes, it was.
We have a question here from Ann and Dan. When should one top dress the lawn?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It kind of depends on what your objective is. You can do it multiple times throughout the growing season. A lot of people will focus on doing it during periods of active growth. So depending on where you are in the state, that may range from around April or May to September, October. And you may choose to top dress once in the spring when your turf grass is most actively growing, or you may choose to do it 2 to 3 times. Typically, what I would recommend focusing on is making sure that you don't apply too thick of a layer at any one time. So when you go out and you top dress with your material of choice, whether it's kind of a coarse sand material or a high quality compost material or some combination of the two, I'm trying to keep it within about 1/8 of an inch to no more than 1/4 of an inch to make sure that you don't smother the turf. I've seen people accidentally smother their turf. And so if you keep it kind of light, what it'll do is it'll encourage natural breakdown of the thatch. That material will break down and support the root system. And you can go back and do it again with a little bit more if you're seeing some real benefit from doing that.
Did that answer it for you, Ann and Dan? Okay. Daniel wants to know, where does limestone fit on the scale of silt, clay, and sand? As I dig holes for trees and posts, I have 8 to 10 inches of dark loam, real dirt, and then 24 inches of limestone that turns to powdered chalk. What does the triangle scale say?
So limestone is going to be kind of in its own category. It's going to be outside of the context of our traditional sand, silt, and clay. You know, while it will break down into a finer material, a lot of times when we see it in its natural state, it's going to fall more into the category of a gravel or rock-like material. So it's kind of going to be its own thing. And you know, there are things that we can sometimes, steps that we can sometimes take to kind of dissolve those materials, but usually they're so prolific in our soil, and they've just been there for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so again, that's where, you know, if you've got 24 inches of or you say you have 8 to 10 inches of a dark loam, you know, that's not too bad. And you could maybe add a little bit more on top of that if you wanted to deepen your root system. But yeah, that bedrock material, even if it's chalky, is not going to be ideal for really supporting plant growth. So it's kind of outside of the triangle, unfortunately. I don't know if that answered your question. I hope it did, but feel free to follow up if it didn't.
So Daniel says thanks. Any other questions? No, feel free though, folks, you know, go ahead and if you're not comfortable, or if I'm not giving you enough time to type in your question, just, you know, go to the icon down at the bottom and unmute yourself. Just hit that microphone and you can just chat away.
Don't be shy.
Yes, please don't. All right. Well,
and I will just say, you know, I've got my email here, and so if you mull it over and you've got a longer, sometimes I get people that they just have a much longer thing that they want to talk through, and so feel free to just shoot me an email if there's a bigger topic you want to discuss, and I'm happy to help you however I can.
okay, well, I'm going to, yay, give a big applause
Absolutely.
to
Great.
Dr. Becky Blowen. I just thought this was a fantastic presentation, and what a wonderful wrap up for the whole series. You know, you touched base on a little bit of, you know, from almost every one of our talks, and kind of just did a whole overview, and I didn't know that was going to, so it just worked out really well. So what we're going to do now is run to the tour portion of our program, and if you want to with us, fantastic. If you have already, I'm gonna, Brian, did you have a question? No? Okay. So I'm not sure. Yeah, I think he's talking.
I think he is too, but he's muted.
Yeah. Brian, go ahead and unmute yourself if you're trying to talk to the group. There you go.
There's a wide variety of soils out there, varying in price and composition. How do you evaluate them as an additive to your garden? Is any, you know, if you see them for $1.50, can you get a bunch of it and throw it in there and hope that is going to help, or do you have to look for specifics?
That is a great question. So I will share that in my experience, things that are labeled as topsoil bag products at the box stores are typically not great quality for utilization in the landscape. What I would look for is a local resource for native soil to your area, and I would potentially contact either the county agent or the Master Gardener group and see if they have recommendations for a local resource for this. In terms of, you know, really trying to pick something that's the best fit, you do have the option of, it's a little extra legwork, but you do have the option of testing a sample of soil before you invest in a larger amount of it, and learning a little bit about the texture of that soil, the pH, and the nutrient availability of that soil. And that may really help you to make a more informed decision about the value of that soil. Again, one of the big things that you want to ensure is that it is a coarser texture than what your native soil is. So you may test the two. You can typically feel it out though. You know, if I am, you know, feeling two different soils in my hand, I can typically tell when one is much finer than the other, and I'll just be able to sense that from their properties. But you can test that as well. We have a soil testing lab in AgriLife where you can submit soils to College Station. There's also some really great labs out there that specialize specifically just in this, in testing soil for use as top dressing material or as a root zone mix. And so if you shoot me an email, I'm happy to connect you with some of those resources. But it is kind of tricky. I think if you focus on a coarser material and you try to find something that's native to your area, and that has you know, some good quality to it in terms of the nutrients in it and the pH, I think that you'll be pretty safe.
Thank you.
Good question, Brian. Okay, anybody else? All right, so let's go ahead and we are going to move along, and I am going to bring up my portion and share with you. Let's see here. Okay, so I think we've accomplished that. Sometimes that's a little tricky for me. So let's go on with our tour. And again, thank Dr. Becky Bowling, you know, immensely for a wonderful presentation. And you know, as she invited you to ask questions, if you know, through her email. So please do take advantage of that if you so desire. We're also going to just let you know that the program has been recorded, and with Dr. Bowling's permission, we will go ahead and upload that to the Riverside Nature Center website, and real easy, riversidenaturecenter.org, and you can find that recording there. So back to UGRA's EduScape. As I mentioned, you know, at the very beginning of the program, you know, this whole project began as a need to kind of rectify some issues around the building, UGRA's building located at 125 Lehman Drive. And so it all started back in 2016. And the partnership began with UGRA and the Hill Country Master Gardeners. And they came together, they created and designed and implemented this wonderful landscape that's, you know, it's twofold, it's form and function. It's you know, very attractive. It has aesthetic values, but more to the core, it is addressing the need to mitigate some erosion and runoff issues that were present. So it's definitely a landscape with a purpose, and hence the term EduScape, because this is a development for the public to become aware of the different kinds of techniques that can be implemented in our own personal landscapes, as well as landscapes at businesses and such that may be experiencing similar issues, which most of our landscapes in this area do have some issues with runoff and erosion. So, you know, the beauty of virtual tours, we get to see some pictures from the past. So we're going to start off by doing that. This is the front entrance of the UGRA building, and you can see what it looked like prior to the redesign. And now we've got current views. So I'm going to run through a couple of them, just kind of looping around the building. So in the parking lot before, and then after, with a little modification there and some xeriscaping. Going down on the left-hand side of the front entrance. And then now over to the side, you can see, you know, the typical use of boxwoods, and no longer. Now we're getting into, as I said earlier, some xeriscaping. This is along Lehman Street, down along the back end of the building. You can see at one time it was just, you know, all lawn, just, you know, kind of a monoculture expanse. And then now, quite a difference. Again, further down on the back entrance, and then currently. So that leads us to the front entrance into the parking lot. Again, 125 Lehman Drive. I'm going to encourage you to, you know, take a trip over to the building and walk around. I mean, you can do this loop, you know, in person, and you know, take in the whole experience you know, with yourself. Take a friend, you know, somebody that needs, you know, a little nudge. It's a nice little day outing. So we come to our welcome signs. I do want to mention that there are 10 interpretive signs throughout the landscape, and each one is going to you know, be a topic of that kind of area. You can see the listing here. But what's fun about this is that each sign has a QR code. So if you are in person, you can use your cell phone and look at that, you know, highlight that QR code, and you will go to the UGRA website, where there is much more information concerning each one of these topics. If you wanted to, after this, rather than going, you know, in person, you can go to the UGRA website and go under their major initiatives to the EduScape site portion of the website. And again, you can look at more resources in detail at that time. So our next sign is the Guadalupe River, and you know, that's it's appropriate, I should say. You know, we're talking about UGRA project, and you know, this Guadalupe River, of course, is at the core of their mission, and you know, that just brings us back to why we are, you know, concerned with the landscaping, and why we are taking these measures to mitigate runoff. I mean, eventually all of this goes into the river, into the tributaries, the smaller creeks and such. And so it is our, you know, responsibility to curtail that you know, source of pollution, and that's washing into our waterways. So as we go along here, the first thing that we're going to see is this. Oops, there we go. We've got a little bit of a lag time, I think, to get this to play, but doesn't seem like it's going to play for me right now. But this is a little water feature that's right at the entrance of the UGRA building. Again, form and function. It's aesthetically pleasing. It's always nice to hear, you know, water going through, you know, a fountain or artificial stream. But this also is representative of the headwaters of the Guadalupe. I mean, how the groundwater comes up, seeps up through the fissures of our limestone, and comes out on the surface through seeps and springs. Oh, so now here we go. Okay, so you can see how wonderful this feature is. All right, so we're gonna move along, and the first major feature that we come across is the rainwater catchment system. This is a 30,000 gallon storage tank. It is collecting rainwater off of approximately half of the roof, of the building roof. It's about 10,000 square feet of roof. And so that comes down and is stored here. This water is used strictly for irrigation purposes. It is not potable water. But, you know, as we're going to see that rainwater catchment systems, you know, come in all shapes and sizes. You know, this is a quite intricate, you know, system. But as we move up along our crushed granite trail here, we're going to see that, as I said, a much smaller system. This is the interpretive sign that you'll find outside of, well, right next to the larger tank. And it's discussing the different sizes and uses of barrels versus, you know, a whole storage tank system. So as I was inferring, we're going to walk along the crushed granite walkway here. And, you know, Dr. Bowling had talked about our native grasses and vegetation and such. And she mentioned, you know, turf grasses as well, all having, you know, wonderful root systems that help with the infiltration of water down into our soil. And here we've got native bunch grasses, the muleys, little blue stem and such. And these grasses are very deep rooted. And so, you know, a great way to help retain water as it where it lands right here with this little area. So we transition from the crushed granite to another a walkway. Look at this walkway and keep it in your mind, because we're going to come back and talk about this in just a second. So we're moving up along, and over to your left, you're going to see a little shed and a little blue thing peeking out. Talked about earlier, you know, that your rainwater catchment can be, you know, a large scale or a small. You know, this is a 55-gallon drum with a rain chain, and it's collecting the water off of the top of that shed. I mean, great way, you know, to go ahead and use this for, you know, hand watering, you know, plants that you have in the very close vicinity. So again, just an example that you can have all different scales of systems. So this takes us to our fourth interpretive sign, which is the Texas wildflowers. The master gardeners, and I'm sorry, it's Texas, Hill Country, Texas master naturalists have put in a pollinator garden, and it is, you know, seeded with all kinds of different wildflowers, and this is actually not the height of the season to enjoy them, but come spring, we'll see, you know, bountiful, you know, flowers, wildflowers in here. But again, you know, great native use of native plants. You're not only helping with, you know, keeping the soil in place and improving, you know, water infiltration, but you're providing food and shelter for our pollinators and other little critters. Just kind of up close more of the plantings. Some more native plants. And this portion of the gardens or landscape, you know, has achieved a certificate of appreciation from Monarch Watch, indicating that this is, you know, a Monarch Way station. It is also certified as a wildlife habitat. I, you know, had mentioned food, water, and shelter. It's providing that, and those are the three things, you know, necessary in a habitat. The entire landscape has also achieved, you know, a wonderful award in 2018 from the Texas Water Development Board, stating that this is we received the Texas Raincatcher Award, and that's quite prestigious. And so we congratulate UGRA in achieving this award. So remember, I had said, look down, notice what we're walking on, virtually walking on. Started off with a crushed granite pathway. We moved to a pavers. The significance of this is pervious versus impervious surfaces. And pervious meaning that it allows water or liquid to infiltrate, to go through, whereas impervious, such as our roadways and hard walkways or sidewalks, do not allow, and they then kind of instigate a little bit of runoff in when you have a compact hard surface like that. So throughout the landscape, we're showing different kinds of pervious pathways. And so crushed granite, the pavers that we were on back behind us, pavers, yes, but still pervious materials because they were not mortared in, they were not concreted in. So you're still allowing through the cracks for water to go between each of these pavers. And then we've got here these turf stones. I think it's it's a wonderful, and I keep, you sound like kind of a record here, but you keep hearing me say form and function. And so this is a wonderful walkway utilizing the gray granite stones in there. You could use other kinds of turf or what have you, vegetative matter to in between the stones. But this way, it's attractive, it's functional, and it's allowing water to infiltrate straight down. So, just a wonderful example of, again, form and function. So throughout the landscape, the little plants have identifiers. And so if you wanted to do, a walk around on your own, you won't just be wondering, what is that? What is that? They're the plants, for the majority of them, are signed. You will also find conservation tips. I believe there's about 20 different water conservation tips throughout the landscape as well. So you'll want to make note of those as you're doing your own self-guided tour, which I hope you do. So now backside, just looking left of the walkway that we were on with the turf stones, you're going to see this is a slope, and there's about a 20-foot slope along the whole property line, which causes quite a deal of runoff. In a heavy rain, it comes down, it's sloping down, and it just pools up underneath the at the foundation of the building. And so by putting in these terraces, using the large stones and different plantings, and then we see along the back of the building this stonework. This is all helping mitigate that and slow down that coursing rain runoff into the back of the building. So all of the stones that I was referring to that you saw along the building, this is a dry creek bed. And so what it's doing is it's that water that isn't soaking down is then traveling to the rocks. It's going to funnel then away from sitting there at the foundation of the building. It's going to funnel along there into several different rain gardens that are at the ends of each of these dry creek beds. Again, part of the dry creek bed going down to rain garden along the side of the UGRA building. Now this is showing you that even though, such detail, just looking into and planning this landscape, we get these rushing, huge rainstorms. It's not frequent, but, when you're getting, several inches in an hour or what have you, no amount of planning is really going to probably, withstand, forces like this. And so, even the EduScape, we had, this was back in, I believe in May of last year, when we had these just really, really heavy downpour. And, it cooled and such, but, it didn't mean that the landscape failed. It's just that it was overwhelmed at this. So, kind of the moral of the story is when you're looking at your landscape, you need to take into consideration what the norm, is, and, bear in mind you're going to have, extraordinary circumstances. But, do you plan for that once in, every 10 years situation, or more on a daily basis? So, you need to take that into consideration. So, again, you can just see, a little bit of the standing water and such during that rain. So this is a photo from last year, and just wanted you to see the the difference in just 1 year time of growing time. From these small little plantings to plants that are now really covering that soil. And Dr. Bowling was talking about that one of the best management tools that you have is cover of your soil. And so obviously this is doing the job. Again, showing several of the plantings and the growth from the first year to the next. So moving along, back on the back side, you see this little alcove, EduScape. It's pointing out, a wonderful Spanish dagger. This is probably the hottest part of the whole landscape. It just kind of, it doesn't get any shade. Hence the small little cactus that you see in the planter. There's some areas where, if you want a little color and such, why not have a little whimsy? It doesn't cost, it doesn't take up any water, but yet, it's a little eye candy. So, don't be shy to, experiment in your landscape with, or inorganic, objects. So let's talk about lawns. It was funny because Dr. Bowling sort of, said just exactly what I always say is, some people love turf, some people hate turf. You shouldn't be ashamed to want to have a little bit of a lawn, in your landscape. We're not promoting that you have this vast, lawn that's just water hungry and just a monoculture. But you can utilize this, as small patches, allowing the kids or the grandkids to have a place to, roll around and just put your toes in. I love that. Walk through barefoot. But in deciding turf grasses, there's some that are much more suited to our environment and are a lot less thirsty. She mentioned, buffalo grass, I think, blue grama, and the third one escapes me, but I know that it's in thunder turf that Native American Seed provides. But here we've got St. Augustine grass that was back behind us over by the barrel with the rain chain. We have zoysia, and we also have tip-top Bermuda grass. All three, low water consumption. And so, no reason why you can't incorporate, this into your landscape as just one part of it. So again, let's look down at our feet. Notice what kind of structure we're walking upon. So this area, we're going back to a crushed granite walkway. However, you can see these big stones that have been put in there. You may not be able to appreciate from this photo that this is a slope. And so in order to keep crushed granite, stationary on a slope is somewhat difficult. But by, placing the stones, that's helping with that. And it's also, pleasing to the eye and kind of gives it a little, difference, another texture to the landscape. So we're coming now to our 8th of 10 interpretive signs, and it's discussing condensate collection. So, a wonderful, wonderful way to water and can be done, again, like our water catchment, rainwater catchment systems. They can be large systems, or they can be, very small. And so here, what UGRA has done is installed a 3,000 gallon tank, and this is attached to their units up top on the roof, and it's collecting that condensate from the air conditioner units. The handy thing about condensate collection is that when do we need, extra water the most? That's generally during the summer and the hottest parts, hottest time of the year. And when do we run our air conditioners the most? Same time. So, we're collecting this water when we, need it the most. Kind of just to give you an idea, Peterson Hospital, regional hospital right across the street, they have a condensate collection system of 3 tanks, and excuse me, they're generating throughout their from their air conditioner units, they're generating about 400,000 gallons of water per year. That's a lot of water, and they're using that to irrigate, their landscape. The Kroc Center over on Holdsworth, they have a condensate system as well, and they are during their peak, excuse me, their peak period, they're collecting about 2,500 gallons daily. And so, what a great way to, collect water and use it, divert it, towards your landscape. As I said, big systems, little systems, you can achieve the same thing by putting a 5-gallon bucket, underneath the drain of your AC, system outside your house. And, so you can always modify something to fit your particular needs. So you may have noticed at the base of that condensate collection tank was a rain garden. We talked about the dry creek beds, running down and ending in rain gardens. These are just wonderful, wonderful structures that can be used in all kinds of different areas. They're great, in suburbs and urban settings. And I'd love to see, rain gardens all along, our roadways here. Going back, up close picture of that rain garden next to the condensate tank. This is, it's interesting. You need to pay attention to the plants that you use in your rain gardens. They need to be plants that are tolerant of being dry, for a period of time, but then being inundated, the roots just really, really wet for, many days at a time as well. And so not all plants are suited for that. Here we've got some mealy blue sage, Texas sage, you've got inland sea oats as well, and there's a couple other plants that I don't recognize. But anyway, again, plant selection, it's making it very attractive, but it's also serving a function. And so that water coming down off the dry creek bed, pooling here is preventing it from then rushing down, further in this situation into the parking lot. So as we move along, we come up to the EduScape sign. People, it's funny, you need to remember that it's not EduScape, it's EduScape. And so the entire EduScape is a EduScape. It's utilizing plants and, different hardscapes, mixing in hardscapes and soft scapes, more or less, your plantings in a way that are water conserving. And so, EduScape doesn't have to be just rock, and cacti or anything, or just rock and no plants, whatever. That does serve a purpose, but there's different methods as well. Again, I alluded earlier, a little eye candy with some, fake elements. Nothing wrong with, a little yard art. And again, it's not taking up any water, but it gives a little added interest. So here, as we round the corner, coming closer to the front of the building, your more typical, what people consider xeriscaping, using the crushed granite and the different size stones, for texture and interest. So as we do a venture around the corner, we've got this lovely antique rose garden. And this is behind a gate, so the deer can't get to it. So that's why it looks so nice and lush. But, just a nice, quiet kind of little oasis to the landscape. So again, kind of contrasting from the first year of plantings to, this summer, and what a difference, from one season to the next, and just showing, how covering that soil, with the plantings, it's not only, helping with the infiltration of the water through the plant's root systems, but it's also, when that water comes down and it's impacting, this is lessening that impact. It's hitting the plants first before it hits that soil, and then causes that kind of little micro explosion, and then displaces, soil particles. So, that coverage is extremely beneficial. So this is, again, last year's picture. We were looking at the top of this, first terrace just a second ago, and last year's picture, and then what it's looking like, currently. Again, growth, and it's covering these gabion walls that were installed as, building this terrace. Again, the water, when it rains, coming down, hitting the top portion and infiltrating down. But it also, with these gabion walls, what it's allowing is the water then to also escape, horizontally. But it has slowed it down dramatically, and then coming to this next layer. This is a really great way, to construct terracing if that is something that you're interested in doing. So this is kind of a bird's eye view of the entire landscape, and these little numbers, signify the different stops, the different interpretive signs, and we can see where the water, coming from the backside. I talked about a 20-foot slope on this property, and where water is running down. So obviously, looking over to our right-hand side, we've got still a track where the water is, kind of going through dry creek bed into a rain garden, but still with heavy rains, it's still going to flow down, and it's going to come to the property line there. So in order to mitigate this point of runoff and trying to keep everything on site, UGRA decided to go ahead and design an additional rain garden and long dry creek bed. So you're seeing in the purple the rain garden, but prior to that in the red is a dry creek bed, also known as a bioswale. And so they partnered with the Kerr County, in order to trench that whole area in order to construct this bioswale. And then they partnered with Beyond Irrigation and Travis Fluhop, who was our speaker at the last talk, talking about irrigation systems. And so here, what they've done, they trenched it out and then filled that bed in with gravel, and then sand, and then mulch on top of that, well, sand and soil, and then mulch on top of that. So dry creek bed, and then what you're seeing on the right is the rain garden. And you can't quite pick out the plantings there, but as we all know, gardening, that first year, it's not so impressive. This time next year, this will be lovely with plants and actually practicing what it needs to do and helping that soil, the water, pool there, and then the plantings taking that down and allowing it to infiltrate in this one little area rather than running off into the neighbor's property. So that's the end of our tour, and I do thank you for staying with us, and I do encourage you to go ahead and take that tour, do a self-guided tour yourself, and so that you can better appreciate the different techniques that are demonstrated in this rather large landscape. Again, this is our last talk and tour for this season. It won't be the last altogether. We'll be working on new tours and new talks starting in 2021, and hopefully by then we can do these tours in person. So I will open it up if anybody has any questions about the EduScape or about the Talk and Tour series. Now's your chance. Go ahead and ask questions. Okie doke. Well, not seeing any at this time. I will say thank you, and I appreciate your participation. And we'll, stay tuned. Again, this recording, if you wanted to review it, or if you wanted, you had a friend that was unable to make it today to Dr. Bowling's talk or the virtual tour, go to riversidenaturecenter.org and look under our Learn With Us heading, and the videos are all posted in a video library. And that will take about 48 hours in order to be uploaded. You will also be receiving an email from me asking you to take a minute and fill out a survey about today's presentation. And so we have some way to evaluate this talk and tour series for improvement for next year. So if that's it, I thank you one and all, and we will see you soon. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you.